Thank you, Mike, for that kind introduction. And I want to join Mike in welcoming you here today. This is our 13th annual State of the State Conference, and I set you up with that polling question so you can blame me. As Mike said, several years ago, we decided to institutionalize our California Center, now headed by Kevin Clouden, when we're really analyzing the state's economy and making recommendations and trying to see that they're implemented to try and change things. For example, we have worked very closely with Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom and Governor Brown in advocating the importance of the state actually having a strategic economic development plan. That's correct, the state has not had one for 25 years. The Lieutenant Governor has been leading that charge. Also, our California Center Advisory Council is chaired by Guggenheim partner Scott Minard, and Scott has been playing a leading role in helping us advocate all these changes. We've had a lot of inquiries over the past few years, given the depths of the recession, particularly in California, for various types of studies, such as the one that is requested the most is how far underwater is my home? Well, some of us still might be underwater, but at least homes are starting to sell again. So we very much are working on developing a blueprint for California's future, hence the title of our slide there. If I could have the next slide, please. This shows you job growth in California versus the United States overall. It's no surprise to anyone in this room that the state had a more severe economic contraction during the Great Recession. Job losses in California trotted out at a decline of 7.2% from the peak versus the national average of 5.3% that you see in this chart. In the initial stages of the recovery, though, California has begun to close the gap. Why? Well, one, because the housing market imploded earlier here, and therefore the rest of the country followed us in this case. Also, international trade has really recovered, and we are very sensitive to that, as well as business investment in information technology and social media has really rebounded. In fact, if you look at this chart very closely, you will see that California has witnessed stronger growth overall in jobs than the nation over the past 12 months. And the state has created 250,000 private sector jobs over that time period. We're not anywhere close to the previous peak, but things are definitely improving. This shows you professional and business service job growth and some of the other categories, and that's really what's been driving overall job recovery in the state. These are business processing, management consulting, engineering jobs, and they pay wages on average about 30% above the statewide average overall. And many of these jobs are in high-tech services and even in manufacturing. And you can see that California stopped hemorrhaging manufacturing jobs and has actually increased them slightly, not anywhere close to where we were before. Construction activity bottomed out in late 2009. We lost over 300,000 jobs, but we have started to see some increase in construction employment, principally due to investments in public construction, highways, etc. This shows you business spending overall in the United States, and it's important because California is a net exporter of information technology and software. Businesses really cut back on their investment during the Great Recession, fearing that we might have a Great Depression too. Fortunately, that did not rise. Silicon Valley, San Jose, in particular, San Francisco, Orange County, San Diego, all had a very severe contraction due to this phenomenon. But you really saw a dramatic increase in the early stages of the recovery, and I would say that it's been the unheralded part of this recovery driving growth. Corporations have been sitting on record cash, and they have been making these investments in productivity-enhancing IT equipment for fearing that they might lose market share to other firms. We're still seeing gains of close to double digits, but certainly that growth has lessened to some extent. This shows you Silicon Valley or the San Jose metro area relative to California overall and the U.S. Last year, many of you in the audience looked at me somewhat skeptically when I said that San Jose, Silicon Valley, would be growing substantially faster than the U.S. overall. And in fact, San Jose is among the top 5 metros in the country in job growth over the past 12 months. It's that recovery in information and communications equipment, it's the social media, it's the Facebook, the LinkedIn, the computer software engineers, systems analysts have been very difficult to find. They're recruiting from all over the country and the world today. California exports a disproportionate share of its total exports to Asia. In fact, almost 35% of our exports go to Asia. And the value of goods shipped to China in particular have risen by over 30% in the past year. Some believe that growing exports to China leaves California susceptible to a slowdown in China, and we certainly do have some exposure. About 13% of California's exports go to either China or Hong Kong combined. But California does not sell commodities other than agricultural products to China. So it's the copper, it's all those types of commodities that are going to be affected. And also, China has been increasing its imports of agricultural products, most of them coming from California. And lastly, there's been no slowdown in exports of IT equipment, aircraft, and other aerospace going to Asia. This gives you a snapshot of port activity in California, both exports and imports. Trade to the outside world supports thousands of jobs in manufacturing, transportation, and wholesale jobs. And this has been a very bright spot in the California economy, and it continues to this day. We're still seeing year-over-year gains in exports and imports of around 16%. And that doesn't really even include the exports of high-tech products that are put on a plane and shipped overseas. Now, all is not good. We know that the housing market is still weak in California, and potential buyers remain on the sidelines fearing that prices might fall further. Nevertheless, we have seen the shadow inventory in California be reduced. It's still not completely been absorbed. It's out there. But we have seen the foreclosure rates decline to almost the same rate as the national average. It still has a long way to go to decline, but I think the housing market will begin to stabilize in California by the middle of 2012. This shows you venture capital investments by state, and it really reinforces the fact that California remains a leader in technology-based economic development. We have substantial strengths in the newly emerging fields of nanotechnology, clean technology, green technology, and alternative energy. I moderated a panel at the Clean Tech Open last week in Richmond, California, which was co-sponsored by Chevron, and saw some amazing technologies and companies that are all in this area, and it's going to be hitting the marketplace very soon. We can see the strength of the technology entrepreneurship in the state by 2 statistics. One is that Silicon Valley in 2010 was responsible for 45% of all venture capital invested in the country last year. And when you add up California together, 57% of all venture capital placements in the country. We released a study earlier this year called California's Position in Technology and Science, authored by California Center Director Kevin Clouden, that really looks at the nuts and bolts of technology and science and how California is doing. It's a complement to our national guide on the same subject, and there are altogether 79 different indicators, and they're organized in 5 different composite areas. And here they are. Overall, California held at 4th place, and all these measures are on a per capita basis. They're adjusted for the size of economies. It's not fair to compare California to Rhode Island on absolute levels. But the gap between California and top-ranked Massachusetts did widen to almost 9 points. California slipped to 4th in R&D investment, also edged down to risk capital and entrepreneurial infrastructure, where it was 2nd, with Massachusetts moving ahead. The weakest performance overall was our human capital composite, where California was ranked 13th overall. And in technology, science, and workforce, we remained in the top 10. But technology concentration and dynamicism, what we look at in terms of new firms being created and grown in the technology area, California still remained at a very high rate. So overall, the state was ranked 4th. We released a study just a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., looking at the global biomedical industry, and this is largely a story of California. Just a couple of factoids here. The country has developed a remarkably productive framework for developing new biomedical innovations and bringing them to the marketplace, and I would argue that it is the most successful business story in the country over the past 100 years. But people forget, as recently as 1980, this industry was dominated by Europe and European firms. But beginning in the mid-1980s, the U.S. surged to the forefront, and California has really been a leader in that effort with the rise of the biotechnology industry. This gives you a snapshot of the World University rankings in the life sciences and medicine from 2010. And according to the QS World Rankings, California had 4 of the top 12 universities in life sciences and medicine in the world. Stanford and Berkeley ranked 4th and 5th, and UCLA and UC San Diego ranked 10th and 12th overall. And I just saw the most recent update that came out last week showing that UC San Francisco had moved to 13th. So you can add another one to there. In this report, we called for 5 major things that need to happen by policymakers. 1, increasing the R&D tax incentive and making it permanent, reducing the corporate income tax rate in the U.S. to be competitive on an international basis, providing adequate resources for the FDA and NIH, and really leveraging the strengths in medical devices that the United States holds, building more human capital, and promoting commercialization of biomedical research at our universities. Just yesterday, in fact, as Mike Loudon told you, we released a study called What Brain Drain? It was authored by Yiling Shen and co-author Perry Wong, and it evaluated the outmigration patterns of high-skilled residents from California to other states. And the findings defy popular perception. California, as you saw, was first in retaining those with a bachelor's degree that were educated in California. And over the past decade, California natives had had the lowest outmigration rate of any state in the country, basically half of the national outmigration rate. Also, California has been less attractive in bringing in educated students, graduates from other parts of the country. That's where we have fallen behind. But one of the fundamental success areas has been in retaining skilled foreign-born talent. California's outflow rate among this was the lowest in the nation. This shows you how many STEM degree holders in California were native versus foreign-born. And if you look at that, the absolute number in engineering among foreign-born was higher than native-born Americans. It's really phenomenal. And this has really been the reason how we've been able to fill that gap between not bringing in as many out-of-state residents. Okay, let me give you a brief outlook again, since I did it last year, on where we're going to be a year from now. We face many headwinds and many policy uncertainties, many of them in Washington. We still have a stagnant housing market. weak consumer confidence. Trade is still expanding, although not nearly as strongly. But I still see the glass as being half full. That's my nature. The U.S. and California in particular have been leading in productivity growth that has harmed our job growth in the near term, but will make us more competitive in the long term. I think the state of California will grow slightly faster than the U.S. average over the next few years, and we will not get back to an unemployment rate consistent with where we were in 2006 or 2007 for many of years, but things are getting much better. And our biggest risk actually today is not really domestic, in my opinion. It stems from Europe and whether the Europeans are going to have the resolve to really address their sovereign debt crisis and therefore banking crisis head on because of all the potential ripple effects throughout the financial sector. So that is the biggest downside risk to the outlook. Apple became the most valuable company in the world until just a couple of weeks ago. This was largely driven by the creative genius of one man, Steve Jobs. He uniquely combined engineering innovations with creative artistry while serving as his own chief marketing officer. In many ways, Steve Jobs really epitomized the strengths of California and its unique ecosystem of business development. A temporary setback did not end a vision that he had. Our creative services group has put together a tribute to Steve Jobs, and what's really remarkable about it is in his own words, and you'll see some other special guest appearances by other tech execs, and I think it's really an indication of what makes California different from every other place in the world. If we could we please have that video?
Hello, I'm Macintosh. It sure is great to get out of that bag.
Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired.
What can I say? I hired the wrong guy.
Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods in my life. You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something. Your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing, and it's totally true. And the reason is the ones that are successful love what they did so they could persevere when it got really tough. And the ones that didn't love it quit because they're sane.
Somehow he had the ability to think out new ways of doing things, not just ways to improve what we have, but do it in a totally different way that the world would swing towards.
Today, Apple is going to reinvent the phone. Here it is. But there is one more thing.
Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick.
This is our story.
I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking. Stay hungry. Stay foolish. I've always wished that for myself. And now, I wish that for you. Stay hungry. Stay foolish.
Thank you. So, a remarkable tribute to Steve Jobs. He truly was an innovator that saw things that other people couldn't.